Such an honor to be in conversation with a poet and whose work I've been admiring over the past few weeks. So I wish I could say that Sumana and I go back a long time, but that's not the case. I'm meeting her for the first time here. But I mention this also to kind of highlight my excitement at having made her acquaintance through her books. What better way to do so? So we'll take up from there. I happened to be at an online conference a week back, which was about archipelagic thinking. And when my presentation was kind of you are so into epigraphs, so mine had a kind of epigraph, No Man is an Island by John Donne. And I was so struck by the fact that one of your poems in VIP has that line, no tree is an island. So I thought that I wondered if we could begin with you talking about where you see trees somewhere, envisioning that archipelagic vision. What do trees have to tell us on that?
Good afternoon to all of you, and thank you. Like I said yesterday, you gave me your part of your Saturday afternoon, and this is even more of a bonus, a Sunday afternoon after Mangshabhat. So thank you from Ananya and myself. I always find it interesting that John Donne, the first poet I kind of fell in love with in my English literature syllabus. He's saying this, of course he had moved on from being a poet to much more by that time. He's probably saying this as part of a sermon in the church. So as part of the sermon to say no man is an island, after so much has happened in his life, addressing a congregation, and I use the word congregation in particular, but also the fact that he's saying it in England, an island for all purposes, right? And the fact that it has always felt like an island in comparison to mainland Europe, as it were. I was thinking that I think this has always stayed with me, and I'm sure anyone who's made an acquaintance with this idea of no man is an island. For those of you who were present yesterday, I'm sorry I'm repeating myself, but I want to go back to what I said yesterday about a middle class upbringing like mine, where we did not have a telephone at home until the early 1990s. So we had a V phone. It was shared in the neighborhood, like a television set was shared. And then when we had a phone, it was used by all members of the family. Until this moment, or not this moment, but about 15 years ago or so, when people moved on to an iPhone. So the rise of extreme individualism in that eye, where your phone will only open to your fingerprint and your face and so on. So to recognize this in this particular word called island. So I said iPhone, the word is island, let's extend it, isolation, individualism. All these words, there's a reason they begin with I. It takes me, why did I now try to answer why you asked me why I wrote no tree is an island. It takes me to, of course, the work of Jagadish Chandra Bose and communication between plants, but also more particularly, for those of you who are interested, to the work of the scientist and ecosophist Susan Simard, who writes this wonderful book called The Mother Tree, where she's talking about what so Ananya just a little while ago gave me a collection of her poems, and as a kind of, she signed it saying, let's go to, hope my birds and your trees will do what E.M. Foster said, only connect. And this is what plants have been doing. Underground, So Susan Simmer tries to show that what we have today, the internet and these networks of communication, has existed among plant life and their roots ever since they have been plants. So that was playing on my mind, that no tree can exist in isolation. So trees do communicate, they do warn each other about an impending drought, some calamity that they can sense. So we only think, it's only frogs when they croak, they are telling us about an impending storm, a thunderstorm or rains, but they also do communicate with each other. It also comes from a personal, I would say, this is an unnecessary biographical note, but the fact that I had turned to plant life to escape the emotional economy of the human social life, and I realized by the time I came to writing this poem that I had been wrong all along. It is impossible to be living and be living alone. So no tree is an island.
Reminds me of, well, Aristotle saying that if you're without friends, you're either God or beast. That sort of thing. So I love that phrase, I want to become a tree. And I just wondered about your journey as writers, consummate prose writer. I've been reading your latest in Open the magazine, and of course your fiction and your stunning poetry. And I just wondered or would you say that these are, you talk about parallel lines, are these parallel lines your desire to become a tree and your the process or trajectory of becoming a tree and becoming a writer, do they intersect somewhere?
No, I did not know I wanted to be a writer.
Okay.
I was working towards, so I went the very safe middle class route. I was bad at everything else. So I was envious of my brother who was good at sports, could play the tabla well. I could not sing, disappointed my parents. I could only read. So I was that child who was bad at everything else. I was so bad, believe me, even in the sports, march past, the sports teacher would have to smuggle me into the middle line because I couldn't even do the left, right, left thing to the, so I had no great hand-eye coordination, bad at everything. And so I went through this particular route. I came first in class because my friends did not study, not because I was good. And I'm not saying this from any sense of humility. So going that route, school, college, university, clearing the net exams, getting a job, moving towards a PhD. And then my husband moved to Germany. I was listening to everything that you were saying about life there. I moved towards writing a PhD. I accompanied him. And there, this was before Skype, before WhatsApp and all of that. And I missed, of course I missed my family. But what I missed most was the sound of the Bangla language. And I began, because this is the best thing about, I think, a life in Germany. I could find books there that I don't find in India. As in, I remember my husband researching Ayodhya, 1992. He had not found documents that the BJP had managed to, I hope I'm allowed to say this here, that the BJP had managed to kind of make invisible. He could find it in a library in Heidelberg. So I discovered Bangla poetry in a way I hadn't, because of the kind of schooling and education that I had had. ICSE education makes you hate the language that you have been born into. At least that had been the case with me. I just saw from your bio note you have a German connection as well, Ananya. As in, you know the language much better. I can only read the menu card.
I cannot live in such a thing. It's been a very long time. And like a tree, there's something organic about a language. You have to live with it.
I agree. Yes. That's my relationship with Nepali now. So I discovered a Bangla poetry and began reading it fiercely, just for the sound of Bangla. So it really became, in a sense, my mother tongue there, this discovery. I was writing a PhD, so that was part of what I would, not in a very kind way, call the day job. I was working towards it, and I'm tired of the language of critical theory and academia. I would turn to poetry, Bangla poetry, and at that time I realized that I wanted to write what today is called creatively. In my head, no such distinction exists, of course. But I could not write in Bangla. I would love to, in the sense of writing Bangla poetry. I did not think in Bangla. So then I said, what could be the second best thing? Let me try to write Bangla poetry in English. So that is how I began writing. I was very old by then. So I am always surprised by my students in class. So when I've been writing since I was 4 years old or 6 years old, I always imagine what such a life would be like. I began writing in my early 30s. So I cannot say I have no memory of wanting to be a tree then. That happened much later, I would say, about 15, 16 years ago. But that is how my life into writing began.
Yeah. I was thinking about the tree as a tree. If we could stay with that trope. I thought of that analogy because of the very creative way you bring in scholarship, particularly in the book How I Became a Tree. You talk about a staggering spectrum of writers from across, particularly Bangla literature, and you interweave that with so much from the Western world as well. So you talk about Nandalal Bosch and Nandalal Bosch correcting Rani Chando. I too had kind of come across that in Rani Chando's memoir about starting root upwards. So I wonder, is that how you approach writing? Suppose can we think about a book as a tree that kind of, do you really start at the root? Where would you start with the book?
Such a lovely question, you're making me think. I found this not in Rani Chando's memoir, but in Satyajit Ray's recollection of his time at Santiniketan. As you know, he called Nandalal Bose Master Mashai. So in his memoir he says, Master Mashai said that all along I had been taught how to draw a plant the wrong way. So you see, in a poem, How to Draw a Tree, I write about the Europeans who draw the tree, from top to bottom. And Nandalal told Satyajit, the young Satyajit, that is not how a tree grows. A tree grows from the root upwards. That is how you should draw a tree. So does my writing operate in this way? No. I'm very conscious of not being tree-like. It's taken me a long time to understand that this desire, so this desire to become a tree, people link this now because I also happen to be in academia where I have to earn a living. They're trying to link this with really high-sounding phrases and all of that. I wasn't thinking of that. It was a moment of despair for me. I was going through a very, very difficult time in my emotional life, and I thought I wasn't ready to die by suicide. I was thinking of my mother. I'm sorry if this is not something you came to hear on a Sunday afternoon. I said, no, I cannot die, my mother and all of that. Also, I didn't have the courage to kind of go that way. I said, but I don't want to live like a human, or not a social human. So, but is it possible, just on the level of the imagination, that I could live as someone else, another living thing? And I thought, how to live like a dog. Anyone who's lived like a dog knows that it is not outside the emotional. I was trying to escape the emotional reciprocity that defines social life, a kind of give and take, very, very responsive, a serve and volley always. And it was impossible to, think of living outside the emotional economy if one lived like a dog. I remember being very unwell at that point of time. It was summer, and I thought the ceiling fan was whirring above my head. And this is in Shiliguri, which is where I'm from. And I thought to myself, okay, how about, and remember this is all on the level of the imagination, not literal of course, unlike someone who wanted, a Japanese man who underwent plastic surgery to look like a dog. This is not what I was thinking of. I was thinking of the ethic, what is this living being's ethic? So I thought, is it possible to live like a ceiling fan? And immediately I had to banish that thought, because a ceiling fan is dependent on another human to turn it off or switch it on. I can't remember whether days passed or months or years, and at that point of time I was really unwell and almost, if I may use this word, not very casually, bedridden. And it was summer, I was lying on the bed. There's a papaya plant outside our bedroom window, and the sun had fallen there, and I had to lie on my back. So I was looking at the ceiling, and I suddenly found that the shadows of these, how beautiful papaya leaves are, and they're like this, right? So when they dance, of course dance is a very anthropocentric work, or moving into pathetic fallacy. Absolutely. That's exactly the thing that I hadn't planted. So what happened was I saw them moving on the ceiling, and I felt something inside me move, shift or change. I felt so grateful. I had not planted the papaya plant or tree, but they had given me something. And it was like an epiphany. I want to live like a tree. Obviously it's a thought that you can't share with anyone. I mean, I didn't want to sound stupid. It stayed with me. The thought stayed with me. And I remember, again, can't remember exactly whether it was months or days or years. And I thought, surely I could not be the only person on this planet who's had this abnormal desire to become a tree. And then I began looking for ancestors in space, in time, across linguistic cultures and literary cultures. That is how I thought, he was God, he was Siddhartha. He walked all this way from what is modern day Nepal to come to what is modern day Bodh Gaya.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah. Yeah, so why?
Use the mic. We can't hear anything else.
I'm so sorry for this. Yes.
It's just that to keep it.
I'll remind you. So what is it that sitting under a tree brought to him? I discovered a poem by Sunil Ganguly on a similar subject. So what does sitting under a tree do to a human? Why have panchayats and all these, so many, not just in Indian culture or South Asian culture, but otherwise as well. The sitting under a tree brings something to the human, or at least that is how the human likes to imagine it. Then I also discovered Tagore, and because we are here, Rabindranath and Bolai, that short story about this little boy, and then Jagadish Chandra Bose, who I found, like me, did not have biological children of his own. And I found that reading his research papers, both in English and Bangla, how he was constantly referring to plants as infants, bacha, and his desperation to find a Torulipi, a plant script, is similar to the urgency. You are a parent, so you would know this, having experienced this. You want to hear your child speak the first words, the first sounds, as it were. I know that at this moment it might be a distant memory for you, but the similar kind of response. So discovering cultures in Australia where people had become so lonely or alone that they were writing letters to trees in Melbourne. It traverses across the world. This wasn't an urge to be a part of what in academia is called world literature. I just wanted to see if there were people like me everywhere in the world. So an intellectual ancestry came as a result of the need to find an emotional ancestry. Does that answer your question? Oh, you answered me whether I write like a tree? No. This discovery, so in this book, How I Became a Tree, I was moving with the desperate urge to feel and live like what it might feel if the human were to live like a tree. And then I discovered that the tree has been a very patriarchal model. the reason, for instance, Deleuze and Guattari, two of my favorite thinkers, criticized or critiqued the tree model, as you know. So later on, and this was in prose, as you said, later on over the last few years, I wrote this book, this collection of poems, which is VIP, very important plant, where it's the opposite urge, where what would happen if trees were to be transported to a social world? So would trees have life insurance policies? Would that, for instance, protect these trees that are cut on the highway arbitrarily, or whatever, with this ghost of development in mind?
You ask how to karaoke like a tree.
Yeah, how to karaoke like a tree, yes. So do I write like a tree? No, I try to write like grass. That's my kind of alternative.
Some very evocative words there about being grass. I was reminded of them. So you talk about tree time, and I just wondered, and there's another very, very memorable phrase, a deadline world. So how do you kind of straddle these two worlds? You're talking about having to earn a living, and well, so.
I was writing this at a time, I used to teach in government colleges in Bengal, that network. By the time I had come to, so this did not grow as a book, that is why I said grass. So I was writing, Anjum, I think if you turn that thing off, you won't be so cold. Just need to, yeah. ওপরে করে দিতে হবে মনে হয় না ওই যে ওই
লোগোগুলো অলরেডি ওপরে করা আছে
I say this as a Shaumovathi, I feel cold all the time. So,
what did I say? Yeah, you talk about the world being deadline.
right, yeah.
About free time, that's the other end.
So by that time, because I shared this with, I think, a couple of people. I had written an essay on Mamata Banerjee, not on Mamata Banerjee, but about literary and linguistic culture in Bengal. It had been published in Caravan magazine. I was teaching in the government colleges. I had no idea that someone from the TMC would ever read the Caravan magazine. Quite clearly, someone from one of my colleagues, more, yes, obviously didn't like me enough. And so I was transferred to these colleges that are announced, so I was just telling someone in the morning over breakfast, but a college which did not even have a toilet, so I would have to travel to 6 to 8 hours from home. By that time, I had decided that I was going to resign. And at that time, the media hadn't gone the way it has now. I resigned in 2016, so it's been 7 years. So I thought I would be a freelancer and I'd be able to earn a living. I would not have to work to deadlines and things like that. And then the media collapsed and I realized I would have to look for a job. That is how I ended up teaching at Ashoka University. About free time,
Yes, please.
okay. I think I'll be able to answer this better and in a more organized way. I'll read just 2 paragraphs. This is from, actually I wrote this at the very end after I've written everything.
I was going to say there's these 2 qualities to your writing. You're both bold and tranquil at the same time. It's not very easy to be able to do that. And listening to you about the uphill kind of journey it's been, one can see that.
Thank you. So the section that Ananya mentioned is called Free Time. So it's my editor, David Davidar, who kind of lifted these phrases. I did work in sections. At first, it was the underwear. I wanted to become a tree because trees did not wear bras. Then it had to do with the spectre of violence. I loved the way in which trees coped with dark and lonely places, while sunlessness decided curfew hours for me. I liked too how trees thrived on things that were still freely available: water, air and sunlight. and no mortgage in spite of their lifelong occupation of land. My amorphous fancies about trees began to coalesce when I entered middle age and began to weigh the benefits of a freelancer's life against that of a salaried professional. An epiphany wrapped me like a tendril. Were trees freelancers or salaried employees? A tree was a daily wage laborer, its life of work bound to the cycle of sunlight. Holidays, vacations, weekends, the salaried life, pensions, loans, all of these were recent inventions, nothing more than consolations offered to employees like myself. So, when I look back at the reasons for my disaffection with being human and my desire to become a tree, I can see that at root lay the feeling that I was being bulldozed by time. As I removed my watch from my wrist and clocks from my walls, I realized that all my flaws, and this I now discover that I share with many others, came from my failure to be a good slave to time. I began envying the tree, its disobedience to human time. All around me were estate developers sending their fleets of workers to construct skyscrapers to tight schedules. The trees they planted in the gated communities annoyed them. They would grow at their natural pace. It was impossible to rush plants, to tell a tree to hurry up. In envy, in admiration, and with ambition, I began to call that pace tree time.
Thank you. That more than answers my question. VIP is, in many ways, part of it is kind of a companion volume to how I became a tree. But I was particularly moved by the last few poems where you kind of you talk about the journey of leaves and foliage and parts of trees into objects of daily use and objects that we consume. I love the way, the sensuousness with which you talk about kolapata or banana leaf. There's a striking defamiliarization. And and Choctapurni in particular, and I think would be very apposite. Visva-Bharati has just had its convocation, and the symbolism of handing over a leaf. But you see, I just wondered if you've thought about architecture, because I couldn't help couldn't help remembering that Choctapurni is also the name of a building complex in Kolkata, and I just wondered how would you relate everything that architecture, built environment represents as kind of, would you see that as continuing from trees? I mean, the whole, do you understand? I mean, a building that is named Choctapurni, do you see that as a kind of violation of everything that trees represent? Or a desire in human beings, in art, to become trees, however differently, what the product looks like?
I didn't know about this. As you know, I'm not from Kolkata and rarely get to visit Kolkata or don't want to visit Kolkata. I didn't know about this. I feel very disturbed by this, Ananya. I live in Shiliguri, as I said, and the street that I am on now, a house built by my in-laws in the early 1970s, there are no old houses left anymore. And these real estate developers have, changed the entire street. There's I think 2 blocks away, there's a flat coming up which is called the Orchid. So it not only is it a form of dislocation, it annoys me, but also confuses me.
Like a house called, or a building called Valuncho, and I saw that happening in Santiniketan.
Became a tree, which is the relationship between, I don't use the word architecture, but the fact that all our statues, for instance, are of quote-unquote important people. There are no statues of trees, no statues of animals even, very rarely. So I think in our heads, we've already decided that trees are statue-like. Because statues don't move. I think, the living or those who move, the animal kingdom, certainly, I think it's very mammalian to expect the living to move. I was trying to replace that kind of solidity of architecture with the substancelessness of shadows. The fact that they move, the fact that they are in flux, the fact that, sure, they're like plants are dependent on light, shadows too are dependent on a light source. So to answer your question in one word, I think it would be yes. This is not a one-word answer. There is much to take from plant life, except that we don't. Forest dwellers do. Animals who build their homes and nests do. The reason we like that kind of architecture. I was thinking recently, trying to write about it as well, why the shapes of trees move me so much. Yesterday I met Shomik at your place, Shomik Bagh. We've known each other through Facebook for some time. And one of the first things I said is when I was taking this train, the first time I've made this journey actually from Kolkata to Santiniketan, I was just marveling at the beauty of the trees by the railway track. Even today, or I think yesterday, I was pointing out to Anju or whoever was with me, look at that tree in Santiniketan. There are two very good books, as you know, it's published by Visva-Bharati Press, Trees of Santiniketan, which is a catalogue of the trees there. Yesterday, thank you for the music and that brilliant food, but the gift for me were the trees at your place. The fact that they had some history. New architecture does not give me that sense of history, that sense of belonging. So when I entered their compound, for instance, I'm sure you've been there before, yes. One of the first things I noticed was the floor, the fact that there was something about the architecture, and he was there. I asked him a little, and the fact that all of you, because I know so little about you, you told me that you had a background in architectural spaces, and I was just marveling about how your home and the surroundings were in conversation with each other, which is rarely the case in. I live in Soni. I have to stay in Soni, but I won't use live. That'll feel like some kind of betrayal to Shiliguri. I have to stay on the 7th floor. I have lived on the ground floor for most of my life. So to have to watch, balding trees from above is so disorienting for me. I cannot hear the sound of, because there are only flats and flats and flats. I don't get to hear the sound of birds. So I think architectural spaces, if we substitute this with the idea of living spaces, which is what, as you know, Tagore believed in, so much would change. Yeah.
At this point, the conversation has been intense, so maybe we could break to read, or to have you read from.
I want to say something, Ananya. So I just got her book of poems. She gave it to me right now. And I was noticing, I think, you're sure it's a classmate, right?
At Jadavpur.
Yeah, so we're the same age. And I realized how two women, as I was reading, going through the poems in her collection, this is her book.
It's about birds and yours are about trees. I was going to ask you so.
And both need each other.
Yeah.
One as pollinator, the other as living space. And I was thinking how you, growing up in Calcutta and I in Shiliguri, because this is a question asked to me and I find it very annoying. Would you have wanted to become a tree had you not grown up in a quote-unquote green space like Shiliguri? It's a useless question, as most of you would recognize. But one thing I realized when reading this, and every time I found something, I remember I was touching your knee or your hand, is both of us have a similar politics, which is the politics of attention. And this is where our aesthetic is coming from. So before I read, I would be very grateful if you read this. There was this poem which is about looking at, this shouldn't be just about me. I find it just one, there you I think it's on the left hand side.
Do me such kindness. It's going to be about your reading. So this is called Epiphany. And I remember writing this poem, and I remember...
You wrote it in Santiniketan, right?
Yes,
Yes.
most of them are written in Santiniketan. You write somewhere that all great art comes from suffering. Mine is certainly not great, but I was wondering whether we could ask about whether all art comes from some kind of suffering or not. And you so bravely and boldly talk about yours. But this is about sorrows. Suddenly, I'm deaf to the magpie's morning aria. I even slept through the Wagnerian overtures of a midsummer novesta. Sorrow must have taken a hiatus. Sorrow it is then, faithful sorrow, that looks out through the window when happiness shuts the door behind me. So please, back to your
Was it Larkin who said, suffering is to me... Larkin was this very person who would get irritated and annoyed with everyone, and he said, I think he said, suffering is to me what daffodils were to Wordsworth, or something like that. So, was it Lawrence? I can't remember who said.
I cannot place the quote. I'll check it.
Would you like me to read? Should I read because it's Shanti? You want me to read Shoptapan?
Yes, or Santiniketan. It's about the journey that Santiniketan as a place has had, as a space has had. Might be.
So this is from out of syllabus. It's called Shanti Niketans. A personal kind of biographical. My Mamar Bari is in Santiniketan. So
Yes, your mother went to college here. She went to Nabanna.
no. My maternal grandfather went to get an FRCS degree, returned with a Scottish wife, who was so enchanted by Tagore, forced my grandfather to move from Howrah, where he had his practice, to Santiniketan, build a mud house in Bhuvandana, and now no one lives there. So my mother's been asking me, so when I told her about last night, Ma, I hope I can say this in Bangla, এত সুন্দর সেটিং আমি ইন্ডিয়াতে কখনো দেখিনি. And she said, কোথায় ভুবনডাঙ্গার কাছে? I said, আমি তো চিনি because I've rarely come to Santiniketan. So she said, photo pathabi. I said, ami tulini. I was so enchanted. So yeah, so a part of Bhuvandanga because I have only visited Bhuvandanga, my mother's place, thrice or 4 times in my life. My mother was a Chatterjee. My father from a very low caste. So it wasn't a marriage that was sanctioned. So I never got to enjoy the joys of a Mamarwari life. So here I wanted to write about how Santiniketan came to be, the history of Santiniketan, all the trees that we saw in her beautiful garden space, or how these trees of Santiniketan came to be, how the soil had to be replaced because there was a different kind of colonization. Remember you were talking about indigo in the morning today? So that history of, how do you pronounce it, Shurul? Shurul, okay. I begin with a quote from Frost in this poem. They cannot scare me with their empty spaces. And so Frost walks beside me on red soil, desert places. This too was a desert once. The Tagore quote levitates inside my head, dreary desert sand of dead habit. All of you know where it's from, right? Bhuvandanga, the bank of the world. This was all there was, an inert land that Maharshi, the poet's father, transformed into a revolutionary, bit by bit, massaging foreign soil on the red earth. For even soil must be married for eugenics. And so the gossip of green over my head, trees from abroad, ferried home like trophies, now gone native, like the white woman in batik. This emptiness, this far from the madding crowned hashtag, has an erotics that only school teachers recognize. For nothing speaks of the lack of reciprocity more than vacant school benches. I recognize a teacher when I see one here. Their faces are like a call list filled with missed calls. In this Santiniketan, someone is always absent, someone as necessary as instinct, a memory without gender. And so every tourist turns into a school child. For only here, education has still not become an antibiotic. The tourists, their water-scratched plastic bottles, we saw so many today, their sandals embalmed with dust and disgust, look for trash bins, garbage dumping sites, as if they have come to bury the genitalia of metropolitan life, like students hide report cards. It is terrifying, their urgent need to lose bath water, to become something only imagined backwards, as if Santiniketan were a sex change surgery. For what else is the man at peace except the first line of an aborted story? In their shrill touristy, look at that voice, in their shrill touristy, look at that voices, I hear the whir of ceiling fans, and I suddenly discover when something gets into my eye that wind, like Shanti, is a lone word. There are no right people. Should I stop? Let me stop. Right? We've run out of time. Have we run out of time, Anju?
Yeah, we can have, but you want to take questions or?
Yes. Just maybe ask one question to run into my Yes. I'm very bad at this, as I'm sure is evident. I don't need to underline it. So, Santiniketan has also done that to me. So, I have that very beautiful way of talking about poetry itself. You say poems like bottles are self-sufficient, yet in need of being unsealed. And immediately kind of, it triggered a visual imagination of a message in a bottle, that sort of a thing. So, who do you write poetry for? Is it for yourself? Is it to heal yourself, as you said? Or is it to share with the world? Is art about sharing? And does poetry have a language that kind of helps in that process of connecting with the world?
Because you teach literature, I think you will agree with me that literature is a thought system unto itself. So I might think that I want to write about this, but it's not really writing about anything. So I think if all of you present today had to write about this bottle, all of you would write differently, all of us would write differently. It's because that is one thing we forget, that it's not the content that is being written about. It is we who are giving it form, right? Literature or literary practice helps me to think. So, now I feel like I can't even hear if I don't wear my glasses. I can't think if I don't wear my glasses. So similarly, unless I'm writing something, which is also oblique typing something, I feel like I'm not being able to make sense of the world or the world that I want to understand. Do I write to share? That comes much later. At that point of time, I'm writing just to clear things for myself. But you mentioned, this is particularly true of poetry. In any case, I live in a country or a literary culture where there are 500 poets and 3 readers. So in any case, you are writing poetry basically for yourself. And
But it wasn't this way before.
it wasn't. It wasn't at all. The fact that ছোটবেলায় আমরা কোট আনকোট আমাদের ছোট শহরে শিলিগুড়িতেও আমরা একটা জিনিস করতাম called function. Everyone was sing or write a poem or put up posters. We had that culture. So someone was
Santiniketan has the Shahitya Sabhas for very young children,
okay.
both in and outside school.
Okay, you know, yesterday, again I was telling Amit, I went to this person, his name is Tamal Dash, I think he has a stall here. It just moved me, gave me goosebumps, it moved me to tears. He has a stall, and I recommend this to all of you. He has a stall where he has used car parts, he's turned them into animals. And I said, আপনি তো আপনার স্টলটা দেখে আমার তো পিকাসোর কথা মনে পড়ছে. He just stood up. You know what I'm talking about, Picasso's bullhead, right?
Yeah.
And believe me, I have photos, but you can just go and see, it's right there. And he said, কেউ তো বললো না আমাকে, আমি বললাম এটা যদি জার্মানি হতো, এটা মিউজিয়ামে থাকতো, আপনাকে এখানে আসতে হচ্ছে. So that culture that was once there that we took for granted, for whatever reasons, an extremely, exceedingly individualist culture, gross materialism for whatever it is. Today itself, the two of us were discussing how money, Amit and I were discussing how money cannot be everything and so on. But to come back to your question, and I know we have to end now, poetry is very private. The fact that if it is published, there is so much that I have not shared. But I also don't think of poetry as catharsis. I think that is demeaning poetry in some way. Because the catharsis need not, as we know, catharsis, and this is the thing that people forget. In the creative writing class, some of my students will tell me, but I don't want my poem to be workshop, because this was therapy for me. This was catharsis for me. Catharsis, as Aristotle told us, or as Bharat Muni tells us in a very different context in the terms of rasas, is something that all of you are supposed to experience when you see. It's not inside me. But we see how casually we use the word catharsis. You mentioned the essay in Open Magazine yesterday, and I was kind of, okay, you know that I did not write it for myself. I wrote it for all of us, all women who write, because we are denied space over and over again. So that was much more. With that, I want all women to read it. But even more than that, I want men to read it and see what they're doing wrong. Poetry is much more private, I think. But I also want to say that there is a difference, in my head at least, between the language of writing and the language of publishing. I don't want to write the language of publishing. In that, that is very clear. I see that you haven't either in your book.
Well, I just love such immersive conversations, but lest I monopolize it all, maybe time for 2 questions, or 1, yes. Trust me to overshoot. So over to the house.
Yeah, we have one.
Can I comment on something which she said? When she said about that, when you use the word catharsis, it demeans you. Actually, poetry is something which is so personal, it's like one's personal spiritual journey. You do not want to share it every time with everyone, because that is something so very private. So it is actually not a catharsis, because it's such a spiritual journey that it uplifts you actually. Yeah, I think, I guess that's what he wanted to say when he said it's not.
Yeah, there's a question here.
Not catharsis, which demeans your privacy in terms of poetry.
Then it would, the perimeter of that poem would be limited to me.
Yes,
Right?
yeah.
I mean, it's
And that
much
is like one's person's personal spiritual journey, or whatever it is, one's own personal goal.
In that sense, poetry is a bit like a dream. Only I can dream it. I
Yes.
cannot share my dream, even with the person sleeping next to me.
Right.
Question here. Yes.
Actually, ma'am, thank you for these wonderful words. My question is that realizing the tree-like attributes and empathizing with the trees, is it a kind of attempt to let them grow in our psychogeography, right? For eternally. Is it a kind of deliberate attempt in your poetry? And non-fiction also.
Okay, thank you. I haven't thought of it. My reasons were very selfish. I wanted to take, in any case we take more from the trees than we give. In this case, intellectually and spiritually, I wanted to kind of borrow their life ethic. For instance, Sonipat, where I teach at Ashoka University, I feel I come home to Siliguri every 12 days, and people wonder why, because it's such a strain to make this journey. It's because, do you come for your family? Yes, but I also come for the trees. When I go to people's houses or flats and I say, এখানে একটা সন্ধ্যামালতী গাছ ছিল না? So I remember, because we are conditioned, and I'm not doing this consciously at all. There's a very good thinker based in New Zealand called Matthew Hall, who says we inherently suffer from plant blindness. So তুমি যদি কারো বাড়িতে যাও, তোমার ধরো আজকে যদি এখানে একটা গাছ থাকতো, you would remember Ananya wore something in green and me in the shade of pink or peach. But you would, if I asked you, pechone gaach ki chilo, you wouldn't remember. We are conditioned to be plant blind. And that is why I thought the setting in her house yesterday was so remarkable. That light did not fall on the faces of humans, but on the trees. See, it's like this. You think of the map in your school atlas. You look at the map and you know who created this map, right? Europe is at the center. So it's obviously been created by a European. If it had to be created today, America would be at the center, maybe 20 years later China. Yet all of us know that you spin the globe and we're all, there's no center at all. Similarly, post-Renaissance, which is, I feel slightly scared because she's a Renaissance scholar. What happened? Oh, what a wonderful thing man is, or is man. Put man at the center. So you look at everything, man is at the center and everything else is in the background. So that changed the way we think. What you call psychogeography, we wouldn't even, the fact that we say man and nature. Man is a part of nature. There's a sketch by Nandulal Bose, signed 31st December 1959, Kopar. And it overwhelms me, because puro canvas is blank. And the human, obviously, you make out, he doesn't name it, but it's 31st December. So you can make out, if you're Bengali, on a picnic, that kind of day when Bengalis go for a picnic by the riverside. And the people are specks. Everything is given to the bank, space is given to the bank of the river, the trees. So he could see what the damage that humans had done. And so I don't know whether I'm taking off from your question something that I believe that I know will end now, right, Anju?
Sadly,
Yes. Thank you everyone, and thank you for your invitation, Anju, Atre, Sharmishta, and you too, of course. Thank you all of you.